Commander Veltara had witnessed 3 galactic wars, survived the Great Plague of Centauri, and once negotiated peace between the silicon-based Cortac Empire and the methane-breathing Vex Collective. But standing outside the royal hall of the Zephyrian court, watching a single human marine casually lean against the ornate doors while picking her teeth with what appeared to be a ceremonial knife, she realized her resume might need updating. "Marine Rivera," Veltara said, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence as she tried to process the scene before her. "Perhaps you misunderstood the protocol briefing." Sergeant Elena Rivera looked up from her impromptu dental hygiene session, giving the alien commander a grin that somehow managed to be both charming and terrifying. "Oh, I understood it perfectly. Wait outside while you fancy folks discuss my fate." "Very democratic of you." The royal hall's doors were 12 feet tall, carved from the sacred moonstone of Zephyr Prime, and allegedly blessed by 17 different gods. They cost more than most planets' annual GDP. Rivera had propped her combat boots against them like they were her personal footrest. "The Council of Elders requires privacy for their deliberations," Veltara explained, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had explained this exact thing to stubborn species across the galaxy. "It is standard procedure when determining the fate of unique individuals." "Unique individuals," Rivera repeated, finally putting away her knife. "Is that what we're calling the crazy human who single-handedly stopped your war now?" 3 weeks ago, the Zephyrian Empire had been locked in a brutal conflict with the hegemony of Creeks over mining rights to the astral belt. Both sides had brought their finest warriors, their most advanced weapons, and their most skilled strategists. The war had raged for months, with casualties mounting on both sides and no end in sight. Then Rivera had arrived, not as part of some grand human military intervention. Oh no, that would have been too simple. She had been on shore leave, visiting the nearby human colony of New Brisbane, when she decided to take a quick side trip to see what all the fuss was about. Within 72 hours, she had somehow convinced both armies to stop shooting at each other and start working together to fight off a previously unknown threat of space pirates who had been playing both sides for profit. The method she used to accomplish this feat was still classified, though rumors suggested it involved a lot of swearing, some creative use of explosives, and at least one instance of her physically lifting a Crix general over her head to make a point. "Standard procedure," Rivera mused, standing up and stretching. At 6 feet tall, she was considered average for a human, but towered over most of the Zephyrian court. "You know what's funny about standard procedure?" "I am sure you are about to tell me," Veltara replied, already knowing she was not going to like where this was going. "It assumes everyone follows the same rules," Rivera said, walking over to examine the intricate carvings on the door. "But see, humans have this really bad habit of questioning authority. Especially when that authority is deciding whether to give us a medal or throw us in prison." From inside the royal hall came the sound of heated debate. The Council of Elders, composed of the wisest and most respected members of Zephyrian society, the Seas, were apparently having trouble reaching a consensus about what to do with their human problem. "Perhaps," Veltara suggested carefully, "you could demonstrate your respect for our customs by waiting patiently." Rivera turned to look at her, and for a moment her expression was almost sympathetic. "Commander, I like you. I really do. You've got that whole seen too much war thing going on that I can relate to. But here's the thing about respect. It's a two-way street." She gestured toward the doors. "Right now in there, a bunch of people who weren't even present during the conflict are deciding what happens to me. They're discussing my actions, my motivations, and my future without bothering to ask me a single question. That's not respect. That's bureaucracy." The sounds from inside the hall grew louder. Someone was definitely shouting now, though the universal translators were having trouble keeping up with what sounded like very creative cursing in at least 3 different languages. "The Council's wisdom is renowned throughout the galaxy," Veltara tried again. "They have resolved countless disputes and guided our people through numerous crises." "Oh, I'm sure they have," Rivera agreed. But let me ask you something. How many of them have actually been in combat? How many have had to make split-second decisions while people are shooting at them? How many have had to convince two armies to stop killing each other while standing in the middle of a battlefield? Veltara's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Rivera said. Look, I'm not saying they're not smart people. I'm sure they know all about law and tradition and proper protocol. But they're about to make a decision about someone who operates in a completely different world than they do. A particularly loud crash came from inside the hall, followed by what sounded like someone apologizing profusely in high Zephyrian. Are they always this vocal during deliberations? Rivera asked. No, Veltara admitted. Usually they are much more composed. Your case appears to be generating significant debate. Gee, I wonder why, Rivera said dryly. Could it be because half of them want to give me a medal for ending a war, and the other half want to execute me for completely ignoring the chain of command while doing it? The accuracy of this assessment was evident in Veltara's expression. You know what the really funny part is? Rivera continued. I actually came here to apologize. Apologize. Yeah, I know I stepped on some toes. I know I didn't follow proper diplomatic channels. I know I probably violated about 50 different treaties and protocols. But here's the thing, people were dying while everyone was following proper procedure. She walked back to the doors and placed her hand on the ornate surface. I've been in situations like this before. Committee meetings where people debate the best course of action while soldiers are getting killed in the field. It's the worst part of military life, watching bureaucrats argue about theory while practitioners deal with reality. The shouting inside had died down to what sounded like intense, whispered argument. The council understands the urgency of military situations, Veltara said, though she did not sound entirely convinced. They are simply trying to balance your achievements against the irregularities in your methods. Irregularities, Rivera repeated. I like that much. Better than complete disregard for authority or reckless endangerment of diplomatic relations. Those phrases may have been mentioned as well, Veltara admitted. Rivera laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both amused and slightly dangerous. You know what? I think I've waited long enough. Marine Rivera, I strongly advise against any precipitous action, Veltara said, recognizing the look in the human's eyes. She had seen it before, right before Rivera had done something that military historians would be arguing about for centuries. Precipitous action? Rivera asked, already reaching for the door handle. Commander, I think you mean taking initiative. The doors are locked, Veltara said desperately. The council specifically requested privacy for their deliberations. Rivera examined the complex locking mechanism, which involved both traditional mechanical components and advanced energy fields. It was designed to keep out armies, not to mention overly curious individuals. She said thoughtfully, you know, back on Earth we have a saying, the best defense is a good offense. But personally, I've always preferred why go around when you can go through. Marine Rivera, please reconsider, Veltara pleaded. The council will not respond well to interruption. You could be charged with contempt of court, disrespect to the crown, violation of sacred space. Or, Rivera interrupted, I could be charged with taking responsibility for my actions instead of letting other people decide my fate without input from the person most qualified to explain what actually happened. She stepped back from the doors and Veltara felt a moment of relief. Perhaps the human had seen reason after all. That relief vanished when Rivera began rolling up her sleeves. You know what the problem with locked doors is? Rivera asked conversationally. They're really only effective against people who respect the concept of locked. Marine Rivera, Veltara said, her voice rising in alarm, I am ordering you to stand down. Rivera paused and looked at her with genuine curiosity. Commander, with all due respect, what exactly is your plan here? Are you going to physically restrain me? Veltara looked at the human, who was built like a compact siege engine and had demonstrated the ability to bend steel with her bare hands. I had hoped reason would prevail. Reason is exactly what I'm going for, Rivera said cheerfully. It's just that my definition of reasonable might be slightly different from yours. She approached the doors again, this time with the focused intensity of someone who had made a decision. You know what I think is unreasonable? Sitting outside while a bunch of people who weren't there decide whether I'm a hero or a criminal. You know what else is unreasonable? Expecting someone who has spent their entire career taking action to suddenly become passive. The Council's authority is about to meet human stubbornness, Rivera finished. This should be educational for everyone involved. She placed both hands on the doors and leaned her weight against them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself complaining, the ancient locking mechanism began to give way. The security systems, Veltara began, are designed to keep out conventional threats, Rivera said through gritted teeth. Unfortunately for your security systems, humans are aggressively unconventional. Inside the hall, the debate had stopped. Someone had noticed the doors moving. Marine Rivera, came a voice from inside, speaking in accented standard. These proceedings are private. You will return to your assigned position immediately. Rivera paused in her assault on the doors and called back, You know what? I've got a better idea. With one final surge of effort, she pushed the doors open wide enough to step through. The ancient hinges, which had held for over 1,000 years, finally surrendered to human persistence. Sorry about the doors, Rivera said, stepping into the royal hall with the casual confidence of someone who had just proven that locked doors were more of a suggestion than an actual barrier. But I figured since you're all discussing me, I should probably be here for the conversation. The Council of Elders, 12 of the most distinguished members of Zephyrian society, sat in stunned silence around a crescent-shaped table. Each was dressed in the ceremonial robes of their office, and each was staring at the human who had just invalidated several centuries of protocol by simply refusing to acknowledge its authority. You sure you want me to wait outside? Rivera asked, looking around the impressive chamber with its vaulted ceilings and holographic displays showing the current political situation across the galaxy. Because I've got some thoughts about this whole situation, and I'd hate for you to make your decision without hearing from the person who actually lived through the events you're discussing. Elder Corith, the eldest member of the council, finally found his voice. This is unprecedented. The accused does not address the council during deliberations. The accused, Rivera repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what I am? Because last I checked, I was the person who stopped your war and saved about 10,000 lives on both sides. But hey, if you want to focus on the technicalities of how I did it instead of the results, that's your choice. She looked around the table, meeting each elder's gaze in turn. But before you decide whether I'm a hero or a criminal, maybe you should ask me what actually happened out there. Because I'm betting the official reports left out some pretty important details. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Veltara quietly closing the damaged doors behind them and wondering if there was any protocol in the galaxy that covered this particular situation. There was not. Elder Mantis, distinguished by her elaborate silver robes and the barely contained fury in her 6 eyes, spoke first. Marine Rivera, your complete disregard for proper procedure is exactly why this council exists. Your actions during the Astral Belt conflict, while potentially beneficial in outcome, demonstrate a dangerous precedent of individual judgment superseding established authority. Rivera settled into a chair that definitely was not meant for her, propping her boots up on the sacred consultation table. Elder Mantis, right? I read your file. 300 years of diplomatic service, 42 successful peace negotiations, and exactly 0 minutes of actual combat experience. Did I miss anything? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elder Corith's tentacles twitched nervously. Your research into our backgrounds is noted, Marine. However, wisdom does not require personal experience with violence, doesn't it? Rivera asked, pulling out a small device that projected a holographic display. Because I've got some recordings from the battlefield that might change your perspective on what wisdom actually looks like when people are dying. The hologram flickered to life, showing the final day of the Astral Belt conflict. The images were grainy, taken from Rivera's helmet camera, but the audio was crystal clear. The sound of energy weapons firing, soldiers screaming, and the general chaos of war filled the royal hall. "This is hour 14 of the third day," Rivera narrated, her voice taking on the professional tone of someone giving a military briefing. Both sides had been fighting for 18 hours straight. Casualties were mounting, supplies were running low, and neither army was willing to give ground. The Zephyrian forces had lost 30% of their troops. The Creeks had lost 40% of theirs. Elder Vex, whose blue skin had turned a sickly green color, raised a trembling hand. This is not how the reports described the situation." "The reports were sanitized," Rivera said bluntly. "Military intelligence thought the actual details might be too disturbing for civilian leadership. They were probably right." The hologram shifted to show Rivera herself, standing in the middle of no man's land between the two armies. She was covered in dust and what looked suspiciously like blood, and she was holding something that appeared to be a makeshift white flag. "This is the moment I decided to ignore every order, every protocol, and every piece of military wisdom I had ever learned," Rivera said, watching her recorded self march toward the Zephyrian command post. "Want to know why?" The elder Corith, who had been scribbling notes throughout the presentation, looked up. "We are listening." "Because I had intercepted communications from both sides," Rivera explained, manipulating the hologram to show decoded message transcripts. "Your commanders were planning a final assault that would have resulted in total mutual annihilation. The Creeks were preparing to deploy chemical weapons. Everyone was about to die, and the only thing stopping it was proper procedure." The recorded Rivera reached the Zephyrian command post and immediately began what could only be described as the most aggressive peace negotiation in galactic history. She was simultaneously threatening, cajoling, and somehow convincing the commanding officers to consider alternatives to mass suicide. "This is where it gets interesting," Rivera said, fast-forwarding through several hours of footage. "Because while I was talking to your people, I had already planted listening devices in the Creeks camp. I knew they were planning to break the temporary ceasefire as soon as they finished rearming." The hologram showed Rivera sneaking through the Creeks encampment with the casual confidence of someone who had done this sort of thing before. She was systematically disabling weapons, redirecting supply lines, and apparently having friendly conversations with enemy soldiers. "Wait," Elder Mantis interrupted, her anger temporarily replaced by confusion. "You infiltrated the enemy camp during a ceasefire. That is a violation of every rule of civilized warfare," Rivera agreed cheerfully. "Also probably a dozen interstellar treaties. But here's the thing, I wasn't there as a soldier. I was there as a concerned third party who happened to know that the Creeks were being manipulated by outside forces." She manipulated the hologram again, this time showing what appeared to be a hidden base on the far side of the asteroid field. Meet the Crimson Syndicate, a group of space pirates who had been selling weapons to both sides while simultaneously feeding them false intelligence about each other's intentions. They wanted the war to continue because it was profitable. The council members exchanged glances that suggested this was the first time they had heard about any space pirates. "The what now?" Elder Vex asked weakly. "The Crimson Syndicate," Rivera repeated, led by a charming fellow named Captain Hrok, who had been playing both sides for about 6 months. "He would sell weapons to the Zephyrians, then tip off the Creeks about your troop movements. Then he would sell weapons to the Creeks and warn you about their plans. Classic arms dealer strategy. Keep the conflict going as long as possible." Elder Corith's note-taking had become increasingly frantic. "Our intelligence services reported no such organization. That's because they were good at their job," Rivera said. "Also because they had inside information from both sides. Captain Hrok had contacts in both your military and theirs. The war was never really about mining rights. It was about keeping two armies busy while pirates looted everything that wasn't nailed down. The hologram shifted to show Rivera confronting what appeared to be a heavily armed space station. She was alone, carrying nothing but a standard-issue rifle and what looked like a very large bag of explosives. "This is my personal favorite part," Rivera said, grinning at the memory. "The moment I decided to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Captain Hrock about his business practices." The recorded Rivera was somehow talking her way past multiple security checkpoints, disabling guard systems, and generally behaving like she owned the place. It was simultaneously impressive and terrifying. "How did you?" Elder Mantis began. "Trade secret," Rivera said. "Let's just say that humans have a talent for social engineering. We're very good at convincing people to do things they probably shouldn't do." The hologram showed Rivera finally reaching the command center of the pirate base, where she found Captain Hrock and his crew celebrating what they apparently thought was their greatest success. The conversation that followed was brief, direct, and concluded with the entire pirate operation surrendering without a fight. "What did you say to them?" Veltara asked, speaking for the first time since entering the hall. Rivera's grin widened. "I told them that if they didn't immediately cease all operations and surrender to proper authorities, I would personally ensure that every military force in 3 star systems knew exactly where to find them. Then I mentioned that humans have a really bad habit of holding grudges and that Earth's military was always looking for new training opportunities. And they believed you." "They looked up humanity's military history," Rivera said simply. "Turns out that when you're dealing with a species that once fought a war over a bucket, most people decide cooperation is the better option." Elder Korith looked up from his notes. "A war over a bucket?" "The War of the Oaken Bucket, 1325 CE, Rivera recited. "Started over a stolen bucket, lasted 12 years, involved multiple city-states, and resulted in thousands of casualties. Humans will fight over anything if they think it's worth fighting for." The hologram continued, showing Rivera somehow convincing the surrendered pirates to help her expose the corruption in both military commands. Within hours, the traitors on both sides had been identified and arrested, the false intelligence had been revealed, and both armies had realized they had been manipulated into fighting each other. The peace negotiations took exactly 4 hours after that, Rivera concluded. "Turns out that when people realize they've been played, they get very motivated to find better solutions." Elder Vex, who had been silent throughout most of the presentation, finally spoke. "Your methods were highly irregular, but the results speak for themselves," Rivera agreed. 0 casualties during the peace process, complete exposure of the pirate operation, and lasting peace between 2 civilizations that had been at each other's throats for months. "Oh, and I recovered about 12 million credits worth of stolen resources that the pirates had been hoarding." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling spaceport below. "But here's the thing, elders. I didn't do any of this because I wanted to be a hero. I did it because I was tired of watching people die while bureaucrats argued about proper procedure." Elder Mantis, who had been quiet during the latter part of the presentation, finally spoke. "Your actions saved lives. This council cannot dispute that. However, your complete disregard for established authority is exactly why it worked," Rivera interrupted. "If I had followed proper procedure, I would have filed a report about the pirate operation. That report would have been reviewed by intelligence analysts who would have passed it up the chain of command, who would have formed a committee to investigate the claims, who would eventually recommended action to their superiors, who would have debated the political implications of intervention." She turned back to face the council. "By the time proper procedure had run its course, the war would have been over and everyone would have been dead. Sometimes proper procedure is the enemy of effective action." Elder Korith set down his stylus and looked directly at Rivera. "Marine, your argument is compelling. However, if every individual in the galaxy decided to ignore established authority whenever they disagreed with it, we would have chaos." "Would we?" Rivera asked. Or would we have a galaxy where people took personal responsibility for their actions instead of hiding behind committee decisions and bureaucratic procedures? The debate that followed was intense, with each elder expressing their concerns about the precedent Rivera's actions might set. Some argued that her methods, while effective, were too dangerous to endorse. Others pointed out that the results had been undeniably positive and that sometimes desperate situations required desperate measures. Finally, Elder Corith called for order. "This council has heard your testimony, Marine Rivera. We will deliberate on our decision." "Actually," Rivera said, "I have a better idea." The collective groan from the council suggested they were beginning to understand how humans approached problem solving. "Instead of you deciding whether I'm a hero or a criminal," Rivera continued, "why don't we let the people who were actually there make that call? I've got testimony from soldiers on both sides, recordings of the peace negotiations, and detailed reports from the intelligence officers who helped expose the pirate operation." She activated her holographic display again, this time showing what appeared to be a live communication feed. "In fact, I took the liberty of inviting some of them to join us." The hologram resolved into the image of a Zephyrian colonel and a Krix general, both of whom appeared to be speaking from their respective ships. "Colonel Thane," Rivera said, "General Vorthak, thank you for joining us. Could you please tell the Council your opinion of my actions during the Astral Belt conflict?" What followed was 30 minutes of the most glowing military testimonials in galactic history. Both officers described Rivera's actions as brilliant, decisive, and ultimately responsible for saving thousands of lives. They praised her courage, her strategic thinking, and her ability to see solutions that trained military professionals had missed. When the testimonials concluded, the council sat in stunned silence. So Rivera said, settling back into her chair, "Still think I should have waited outside." Elder Mantis, who had been Rivera's strongest critic, finally smiled. "Marine Rivera, this council has never encountered anyone quite like you." "I'll take that as a compliment," Rivera replied. "It was intended as one," Elder Corith said. "Your methods are unconventional, your approach to authority is challenging, and your complete disregard for proper procedure is deeply concerning. However, your results are undeniable, and your motivations appear to be genuinely altruistic." He stood up, and the other council members followed suit. "Therefore, this council finds that while your actions violated numerous regulations and protocols, they were justified by both the circumstances and the outcomes. You are hereby awarded the Star of Valor, the highest decoration this government can bestow upon a non-citizen." Rivera blinked in surprise. "That's actually not what I was expecting." "What were you expecting?" Elder Vex asked. "Honestly, I thought you were going to throw me in prison and use me as an example of why humans shouldn't be trusted with military operations." Elder Mantis laughed, a sound that was surprisingly pleasant. "Marine Rivera, if we imprisoned everyone who achieved positive results through unconventional methods, we would have no effective leaders left. Besides," Elder Corith added, "we have reviewed your complete military record. The Astral Belt incident was not your first success through creative problem solving. It appears that ignoring authority and achieving impossible results is something of a specialty for you." Rivera grinned. "What can I say? Humans are good at improvising." As the ceremony concluded and the council began to disperse, Veltara approached Rivera. "Marine, I have to ask, did you really expect to convince them by breaking down the doors?" "Commander," Rivera replied, "I've learned that sometimes the best way to get people's attention is to do something they absolutely don't expect. Besides, locked doors are just another form of authority, and we've already established how humans feel about that." She looked back at the damaged doors, which were already being examined by repair crews. "Don't worry about the doors, by the way. I'll pay for the repairs." "With what?" Veltara asked. "Your military salary certainly doesn't cover the cost of sacred moonstone doors." Rivera's grin widened. "Remember those pirate assets I recovered? Turns out the Crimson Syndicate had quite a bit of money stashed away." The various governments involved decided I should get a finder's fee. How much of a finder's fee? Enough to buy a small moon, Rivera said casually, or repair some very expensive doors. Whichever seems more practical. As they walked away from the royal hall, Veltara shook her head in amazement. Marine Rivera, you are definitely the most unusual human I have ever encountered. Commander Rivera replied, you haven't met the rest of my unit yet. Trust me, I'm actually the reasonable one. The thought of an entire unit of humans like Rivera was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. As they disappeared into the crowd of the spaceport, Veltara made a mental note to request a transfer to a very quiet desk job on a very peaceful planet. Some adventures, she decided, were best experienced from a safe distance. Meanwhile, Rivera was already planning her next shore leave. After all, there were probably other conflicts in the galaxy that could benefit from a little human-style creative problem-solving. The universe, she reflected, was about to become a much more interesting place.